Tonight, someone you love will cross your mind for no reason at all, just a flash, their face, their voice, maybe a smell that belongs to them, and for a second the world stops. You do not know why grief works that way, but something older than language does. Death is the one experience every human who has ever lived has had to watch happen to someone else. And what your ancestors did with that moment, what they did with the body, with the silence, with the loss, is one of the strangest and most revealing stories in all of human history. It does not begin with coffins. It does not begin with flowers or funeral homes or the careful words people say when they do not know what to say. It begins in a cave in Spain, roughly 430,000 years ago, where a team of researchers led by Juan Luis Arzuaga discovered something that stopped the field of paleoanthropology in its tracks. At the bottom of a 14-meter shaft, deep inside a limestone cave called Cima de los Huesos, which translates with no ambiguity to Pit of the Bones, they found the remains of at least 28 individuals. These were not scattered. They were not the result of an accident or a predator's den. The bones had been deliberately placed there, one by one, carried into darkness, dropped into the earth. These were not modern humans. They were a pre-human species, possibly an ancestor of the Neanderthals. And they were doing something that looked unmistakably like burial. Think about what that means for a second. Long before writing, long before religion as you understand it, long before language complex enough to explain what death even is, something in the human lineage looked at a body and decided it mattered, decided something needed to be done. The question that has haunted researchers ever since is, why? Anthropologist Barbara King has spent decades studying grief and mourning in non-human animals. She documented chimpanzees sitting silently beside a dead companion for hours, elephants returning to the bones of their dead, touching them gently with their trunks, dolphins carrying dead calves at the surface of the water for days. She argues that what looks like mourning is not a uniquely human invention. It is something that evolved over millions of years. An emotional response to loss so powerful that it shaped behavior across dozens of species. Your ancestors did not invent grief, they inherited it. But what they did with grief, that is where the human story gets strange. The Neanderthals buried their dead. This is no longer seriously disputed in archaeology. At sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq and La Chapelle aux Saints in France, Neanderthal bodies were found in deliberate graves, bodies positioned, sometimes in a fetal curl, sometimes with tools placed beside them. At Shanidar, pollen analysis initially suggested that flowers had been placed around the body, though later researchers like Jeffrey Sommer argued that the pollen may have arrived via burrowing animals. The debate continues, but the graves themselves are real. The more you look at the ancient record, the more around 100,000 years ago in what is now Israel, at a site called Kafse, early modern humans placed ochre pigment, a red mineral powder, beside their dead. They arranged shells and animal bones. They decorated the graves with care. They were doing something that required not just emotion but symbolic thought, the ability to imagine something beyond what you can see, the ability to act for reasons that exist only in the mind. That is an extraordinary threshold, and your brain crosses it every time you plan a funeral, every time you choose a song for a memorial, every time you decide what to put in the ground beside someone you loved. But not all ancient cultures buried their dead in the ground, and here is where the picture gets genuinely strange. Some of the earliest human remains found in Australia, dating back roughly 40,000 years, show evidence of cremation. The body of a woman now called Mungo Lady, discovered at Lake Mungo in New South Wales by Jim Bowler in 1969, had been deliberately burned to ash, the ash crushed, and then the remains buried. This is one of the oldest known cremations in the world, and a culture that looked at fire and saw not just warmth, not just protection, but a way of releasing someone. Across ancient Eurasia, there were sky burials in which the body was left on a high platform to be consumed by birds, still practiced today in parts of Tibet and Mongolia. The Zoroastrians of Persia built towers called dakhimas, the towers of silence, where the dead were placed to return to nature while the ground, fire, and water remained pure. The ancient Egyptians did the opposite. They preserved the body with extraordinary precision, removing the organs, wrapping the flesh in linen soaked in resin, building tombs designed to last forever, not because they feared death, because they believed the body was needed again, that this life was a rehearsal. What is fascinating is how differently these cultures understood death, and how similarly they responded to it emotionally. Every culture, across every continent, across all of recorded and unrecorded history, developed rituals around the dead. Not one culture left behind evidence of simply walking away, of treating death as nothing. Researchers who study what is called terror management theory, a framework developed by Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon and Tom Piszczynski based on the work of cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker, argue that much of human culture can be understood as a response to the awareness of death. Becker's central idea, laid out in his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, was that humans are unique among animals because they know they will die. And the awareness of their own mortality is so destabilizing, so incompatible with the biological drive to survive, that every human civilization has constructed elaborate systems, religion, legacy, art, culture, ritual to buffer against it. Your brain cannot hold the idea of its own non-existence. It genuinely cannot. When you try to imagine not existing, what you actually imagine is a kind of sleep. The self cannot picture the absence of itself. And so humans for hundreds of thousands of years have built stories around that impossibility. Stories about what happens next, about where the dead go, about whether something continues, about whether love has any power over time. The rituals changed, the gods changed, the words spoken over the body changed in every language ever spoken. But the impulse, the refusal to let the moment pass in silence, that never changed. When archaeologist Mary Leakey uncovered early hominin footprints at Litali in Tanzania in 1978, preserved in volcanic ash from 3.6 million years ago, she described the experience as deeply moving. Two individuals, possibly a third, walking together across an ancient plain, the smaller one stepping at one point into the footprint of the larger one. Some researchers believe this might have been a parent and child. Nobody knows. But what you see looking at those prints is the shape of connection. The physical evidence that being together mattered long before we had language to say so. That is what death rituals are, not superstition, not primitive thinking. They are the evidence that connection mattered, that someone mattered enough that their absence required a response, required an act. Today your response might be a funeral, a wake, a playlist of songs, a box of photographs you cannot throw away, a chair that nobody sits in anymore because it was their chair. The form is new, the urge is hundreds of thousands of years old. Something in you refuses to. When tonight someone you love crosses your mind for no reason at all, that is not random. That is the oldest thing about you, reaching through all that time, still refusing to let go.